Soccerex Connected Day 3, a very good afternoon. Ben Jacobs with you. We've got loads of great panels to come. Full schedule is on the app and the website as well. Our presenting partner today is Cell Nutrition Sport, and we're focusing broadly on performance, analytics, and medical. If you want to win that signed shirt, all you've got to do is, in the theme of today, and specifically analytics, tell us a fun or geeky or quirky stat or your favorite football fact. Loads of you have been in touch via @Soccerex to win that signed shirt. Thanks to Jay, who says Ian Wright is a Premier League legend, but his first team was Greenwich Borough. They sold him to Crystal Palace for a set of weights and some away kits, which is a very interesting stat that I didn't know. Jill has been in touch and said, although the USA has won the most FIFA Women's World Cup tournaments at senior level, Japan is the only country to have won all levels of the FIFA Women's World Cup. That's under 17, under 20, and of course the Women's World Cup itself. JG says, surely this wins. Well, I can't guarantee that, JG. Between them, Craig and Gary Gardner have joined or left Birmingham City in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and this year, 2021. And Zach Gilmore has been in touch via Twitter and said, after the 1958 World Cup, several European teams offered the 17-year-old Pelé massive contracts. The Brazilian government declared Pelé to be an official national treasure, and that in itself helped keep him in Brazil. So that's another historical stat that ties in actually quite nicely with our final panel, which is Soccerex Heritage. And stick around, 6 o'clock GMT. We look back on the 1930 World Cup and also touch upon its legacy, i.e. what from that tournament has helped shape modern football. So loads to come here on day 3. And as I say, our presenting partner is Cell Nutrition Sport. A very good afternoon to you. Let's move on now to one of our flagship panels. 4 o'clock, it is entitled Mind Over Matter. And having a winning mentality and being a born winner are key facets that determine who ultimately gets to lift silverware. And here we investigate the psychology behind winning. How much of an influence does it have on the success rate of a team? And is it just innate to footballers and their character, or can winning mentality be coached? To discuss, I'm delighted to welcome Dominic Casciato, the assistant coach and head of scouting at New York Cosmos. Alongside him, Dan Abrahams, a sports psychologist at Dan Abrahams Consultancy. We're delighted to welcome Eniola, sporting director at Aston Villa Women, over 100 caps won also for England, former Chelsea and Juventus footballer, along with a number of other clubs. And Laura Georges is also part of this panel as well, the Secretary General of the French Football Federation. So for the next 45 minutes, we'll be discussing mind over matter. And your moderator is the sports journalist, Natasha Henry. Natasha, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for that introduction, Ben. I'm so excited to be moderating this panel on mind over matter. I think it's a really important topic that we're all discussing now in the world of sport. So I'm going to go to Eni first. If she could just tell us a little bit about what she does at the moment and her career in football.
Hi, Natasha. Hi, everyone. So I'm Eni Aluko, a former professional footballer for Chelsea, Juventus, and England national team, over 100 caps for England national team. I'm also a qualified lawyer and currently working as a sporting director of football, whatever you want to call it, at Aston Villa Women. So very interested in this topic in terms of the psychology of football players and winning mentality. So excited to chat about that.
Dan, if you could just let us know what you do as well, please.
Sure. Dan Abrahams, sports psychologist, former professional golfer, not professional footballer, but I've been, I suppose, embedded in the football environment community for the last 15 years, working with a number of clubs, teams, individuals, held a number of contracts with Premier League and Championship clubs here in England. I've written a number of books, and I have a podcast called The Sports Psych Show, where we can deconstruct everything to do with sports psychology. So I would say I very much specialize in football when it comes to sports psychology. So really excited to be here today to talk about that winning mentality.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
If you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes, of course. So I'm a former football player, and I used to play against Eniola. So I play for the French national team and play for PSG, Olympique Lyonnais, and also Bayern. And today I'm the General Secretary of the French Football Federation. supporting my president in order to develop women football and especially women referees. And at the same time, I'm also an ambassador for FIFA and UEFA to develop programs all around Europe and in the world.
And last but not least, Dominic.
Hey guys, good to see everybody. My name's Dominic Casciato. I'm also a former player and didn't quite get to the level of Eni and Laura, but now I'm a coach. Most recently been the assistant coach of New York Cosmos first team in the USA. And before that was an academy coach at RCD Espanyol in Barcelona.
So we'll get straight to the questions. We've got quite a bit of time and we'll have a Q&A at the end if any of our audience want to ask our guests some questions. So mind over matter. Eni, as a former competitor, is that competitive nature something you're born with, or is it something you can learn or nurture throughout your career?
I tend to think of the mind a little bit like a muscle, and I don't actually think we're born with a competitive streak. I don't think it's something that's sort of it's almost like genetic. I don't really see it like that. I think it's something that's nurtured, and I think it's something that's dependent on circumstances, that is sort of really comes out of you, depending on your circumstances, depending on your family background, depending on your parenthood, depending on the environments that you're in. So, for example, if you are somebody who's grown up with the odds stacked against you, but you have a talent and a gift in football, you have a hunger and a desire to get to the top of that mountain, and you have people behind you who want you to get to the top of that mountain because you're probably their only hope out. That winning mentality is probably going to be developed a lot quicker. So I think it's something that's nurtured. Certainly in my experience, it's something that's nurtured throughout your life, and honed really when you become a professional.
So we spoke the other day, Laura, and you were saying you weren't born with that competitive spirit. Eni's mentioned the family, support and encouragement, and you spoke about getting that from your teammates in the dressing room.
Yeah, it's true. I was not born a winner, I would say. It was okay for me to lose, even if I was a defender, and I like to be always, be able to be on top of the game. It was still okay to lose after competition, because for me, like, competing was more about a purpose. Why was I on the field? Why was I here to support my teammates, to give the best as I could? And then I got it. I got this competition mentality thanks to my teammates. Because I was around players, we were fighting, we had this hunger to always win. And I had also those coaches who would teach us to be winning at every training. So I was like, okay, I'm not a competitor, but I will play with my purpose, my own purpose, and at the same time, I will get this mentality thanks to my teammates, thanks to my coach.
Dan, from a medical science perspective, what is your experience in players who maybe aren't naturally competitive, whether they've been able to hone that skill, as Eni mentioned, or those that maybe need to, how should we say, water it down?
Competitiveness is really complex. So motivation is complex. This is a conversation about motivation. How do you motivate yourself to compete? And motivation goes from the shallow stuff, a need for achievement, a will to win, the kind of stuff that we're talking about, down to deeper stuff that actually Laura's just mentioned there, having a higher purpose, fitting in with your values, experiences, enjoying cooperating with teammates on the pitch. So there's a real complexity there, and I'm saying it like this because That's how you function as a sports psychologist quite often, is you want a player, yes, to be extrinsically motivated, yes, to be high achievement oriented, okay, and people in the world of sport, elite level football, are going to be that way, a lot of them, but not everybody is. And so as a sports psychologist, what I want to do is I want to help people to uncover their intrinsic motivation, not just having a will to win, but a will to experience performance, to cooperate with teammates, to adhere to values, to have that higher purpose. That's, in that way, you can help them become competitive without necessarily having that obvious sort of shallow will to win, if you like. Ultimately, competitiveness is multi-dimensional. And I think the best coaches are the ones who drive players intrinsically. They find out what their values are, their purpose, what experiences they want to have on the pitch, and they orient their attention that way.
I mean, Dominic, as a coach, what skills or techniques do you have to use to ensure people, their competitiveness is at the right level to make them a good part of the team?
Yeah, so I think up until this season, I'd always worked in youth development. So when you're working in the development side of things, you are looking for players that have that intrinsically, that they want to win. But then when we were speaking last week, we mentioned that you probably need a mix of the will to win, but also the will to master a skill and become an expert in a certain area. So I think too much of the will to win can damage an environment, can damage a player's potential as a young player. But then obviously once you get to first team level, that's what it's all about. And I don't think there's many first team coaches that, if you gave them the opportunity to pick between two players, one who's won every game as a youth player and one who's lost every game as a youth player, they're probably going to go with the kid that's winning, even if the ability is the same. So for me as a coach, if you're working with young players, it's perhaps setting up games in training that are competitive, that reward the winners and the losers, but then also looking to focus on mastery of certain skills and certain techniques. And then I think if that doesn't work, then we look to hire somebody like Dan and bring him in to fix it.
Eni, thinking about your new role now at Aston Villa, is that something you consider when it comes to recruiting players in terms of their mentality and what they will bring to the dressing room, or how they interact with your current squad?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, as Dan said, mentality and the will to win is quite complex, and it's actually difficult to gauge on the surface. And when we have a lot of recruitment conversations, you kind of have to ask certain questions and lead the witness to get certain answers that are going to tell you, okay, this person's really hungry. This person, despite winning lots at their previous clubs, still wants to win. This person actually sounds like they want to come on holiday. Do you know what I mean? So there's certain questions that I think that you can ask, and you can. What I've found that I've done is I've presented the winning mentality or the winning intention of the club to say, this is what you're coming into, by the way. So if you ain't ready, tell us now. That always helps as well. So it's almost like sort of signaling what a winning culture looks like, or is trying to look like, to also gauge how the person responds. So I think it's probably one of the most crucial things to do, because if you bring someone into an environment that actually doesn't really care about winning or is self-interested, no matter how good they are, that's going to impact the rest of the team, and that's going to impact the direction you're going to go. So I think a lot of those conversations need to be quite tailored conversations.
I mean, I'll put this question to all of you. Is that something that you believe you have to create, that competitive nature within the dressing room, within the squad, so that everyone that comes into it realizes that's what we're expecting at this club or this team?
According to me, yes, you have to have in the locker room this spirit to want to win. because you know that the games are not going to be easy and you have to have this mentality to go for a fight. But then as teammates, and I was reading, we have different mentalities. We have those who are like always have the will to win, to always, who have strong characters in the team. But I think it's important for those players to respect that other players may have like another way to think about winning.
Yeah.
And not be, because I was reading the other day the book of Phil Jackson talking about Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant inside the locker room, and they were players who were like really hard on themselves, but also on their teammates, and they have this winning mentality. It's important to have people who have this mentality, but it's also important to respect other players who may not have this mentality. But of course, it's important to have this base of winning mentality, but the team is much more than having this mentality of always winning. There's also other ingredients.
I think from my perspective as a sports psychologist, I think we want to have a passion for the how. How do we win more than anything else? How do we help every single individual develop a drive, the right drive for them to win? We've got to be curious about it. I think we've got to engage in divergent thinking about it, appreciate individual differences. It's the how to win that matters. And when you engage in the how to win, then I think it broadens your mind in terms of those individual differences that we've spoken about so far. Player A gives themselves a better chance to high perform in one way. Player B might be a bit quieter, might take themselves off to the side of the changing room and keep themselves to themselves and just visualize and do their thing. They might not be very loud. They might not be very aggressive. So we need that. Also, having a passion to win is also about creating a high challenge, high support environment. You can't just have a high challenge environment. It's got to be high support as well. So again, we need to know the individuals in our changing room and what they each require. So a curiosity, a high challenge, high support environment, the how to win, I think is more important than just a will to win.
Dan, you mentioned the support as well as the challenge. I mean, we're a lot more knowledgeable about mental health and things like that now. How would you say that has changed over the past few years in football in regards to, you know, managers, I think, were a lot sterner in the 80s and 90s in regards to this is what you're going to do. And if you're injured, get out on the pitch and deal with it sort of thing. But how have people's approaches changed to ensure their players do the best they can do?
I think there's more respect for that notion of a person first perspective rather than a coach-led or coach-driven environment. I'm not saying that's been wiped away by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's better. I think it's more sophisticated. I think that environments now are starting to become what we would call psychologically informed. So coaches, 3-4 coaches are now sitting in a room having a better conversation, more informed conversation about thoughts, feelings, personalities, experiences, needs, wants, hopes, doubts, etc. I think there's more literature out there and more accessibility to that literature that's helping coaching units become more accustomed with things like psychological safety, motivational climates, mental skills, and so on and so forth. So I think availability of literature and just an understanding of the needs of the modern day player have perhaps shifted with Generation Z and the millennial generation.
I mean, Dominic, obviously you're in the US. Have you found many differences in terms of the way players approach their games or their training? I know we all know that the Americans can be quite competitive.
Yeah, I'm based in New York as well, which is a very competitive place, just culturally. And just going back to Dan's point, you know, I think all players want to win. And if you get to the level that Laura and Inni play that, everybody's good and everybody wants to win. So then what's the difference? And I think Dan makes a great point about the best coaches will create a psychologically informed environment. They'll understand the individuals within their team and what makes them tick. but then they'll be able to understand those differences and galvanize those individuals to form a team that has shared goals and shared ambition. And I think once you get to top level, I think the teams that do best and have sustained success are those ones that have the strongest sense of purpose, right? And understand their goals and understand their ambition. And most importantly, have buy-in from everybody in the locker room, whether it's the loudest person in there or the quietest person in there.
Laura, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. We discussed the other day about naturally talented players and players that work very hard. Do you feel that a player can be less talented but achieve more because of their mentality?
Yeah, I'm the example. But I was privileged to be trained in the institute, and when I get in this institute, I was surrounded by technical players. Me as a player, I was tough. I was kind of fast, endurance, but I was not technical. And in France, years ago, people were evaluating like the technique of the players. So I was like, okay, I'm not the most technical, but I'm someone who's working really hard. So I'm like, okay, what I have to do, I have to catch up and train more and understand even better the game. So I'm a good example as, okay, I may not be talented as the other, but if I understand better the game, maybe I will improve. And this is how it worked. I worked with coaches. I studied my games, and it was like a shifting point in my career when I said, okay, it's not just about having physical competencies. It's like you have to understand the game. You have to improve on the different levels of football. You're not just a player. You have to understand what it is to be healthy. You have to understand the tactic even better. I even take my license to be a coach to better understand the game. So I'm saying that talent is a plus, but if you don't work at it, it's not going to help you during your career. So work and understand better the game. It's a huge plus.
We've talked about feeling competitive based on your teammates and the people around you, but can we actually train our minds to become more competitive? I'd like to come for you for that, Dan.
Massively so. I think so. I think that can be done through tasks in training. Again, I'll come back to this high challenge, high support. High challenge environment is when we stiffen up our tasks, we make it tougher. We introduce various learning protocols, such as variability, for instance. My experience of 15 years, I've been blessed to spend thousands of hours by the side of training pitches in the Premier League and the Championship here in England. And training tends to be, whilst very intense, it can be very orderly. And actually, the research evidence suggests learning and competitiveness actually increases the less orderly, the more variable, the more chaos. Without going ridiculous, the more chaos you create in your training environment, the more the player becomes accustomed with what they experience on game day. So you can do it through your stretched tasks, through your challenges. You can do it by helping your players become participants rather than just recipients, by making sure they're, as Laura was saying there, they're students of the game. But they're walking out onto the pitch having some stretched goals that they've set themselves. Again, I think very endemic in football is, well, I'm a player, I walk out onto the pitch and I'm told what to do. I just engage in these sessions, I train hard, but I don't necessarily train smart. I don't necessarily train with a goal in mind. And so helping players, being a bit more autonomy supportive as a coach, helping players set their goals, that can help them to become more competitive. There's a whole raft of things. I don't want to hog things here, but there's a whole raft of things you can do. So absolutely there is. Mental skills as well is massive. So we can talk more about that.
Can I just echo what Dan said? First of all, as Laura was talking, I was having flashbacks of playing against her. like tough is an understatement. I don't think we ever beat France any time we played. So it was definitely tough playing against Laura as a striker. And just on the back of that point, Dan, that actually it's so true. At Chelsea, we won, when I was at Chelsea for 6 years, we won, I think, 4 or 5 trophies. And training was always 5 times harder than game on a weekend. So they deliberately made training so stressful that we were always, we used to call it head loss, where, I wouldn't speak to people for days after losing training. And when you get to a game on the weekend, it was so easy because of that high challenge, that complexity in training, that almost sort of, it developed a mentality without actually feeling like you're sitting there developing your mentality, right? Yeah. So and that took us to another level. That took us from coming second every year to now being champions.
So Dominic, when we spoke the other day, you were talking about complacency creeping in sometimes within a changing room and how you manage that, especially because you want the whole squad to get along. So if you could delve into that a bit more for us.
Into complacency. So I think it's a really interesting one, especially after success. And maybe Annie, you could speak about how Chelsea avoided that during a spell of real sustained success for you guys. I think from my point of view, you need to keep things fresh and interesting. So just because you've had success one season doing things a certain way doesn't mean that everything has to change, but you have to find ways to keep it interesting and to stimulate the players. So we spoke earlier about shared ambition and shared goals. So how do you spice up those goals? How do you ramp them up to create a little bit more challenge within the environment to make sure that nobody becomes complacent, and addressing complacency when you see it in players? I think now there's so much support around squads in terms of monitoring their physical workload and things like that in training and games, that you can see if someone's physical output is less than it would be when there's no complacency. So Annie, I'd love to pass over to you and see what the staff did at Chelsea to avoid complacency creeping in.
Well, I think complacency is linked to it's a mindset, right? So what we did at Chelsea, we were very aware of our failure. We used failure and the humility that comes with failure to then drive us to success. So there was no room for complacency, because actually we were able to say, well, we haven't done what we set out to do. We failed, we've come second, we lost the FA Cup, we've done this, we've done that. And we had open conversations about failure as a group as individuals. So we were always accountable. We were always kept honest. I think complacency comes in when it's like, oh, we're going to win, doesn't matter. It's going to be fine. And as you said, when it gets a bit repetitive, but I always thought of it as a mindset and something that humbled, because you're only really as good as your last game, as sort of cliche as that sounds. And I think about 2015 when we won the FA Cup at Wembley for the first time. That was preceded by a massive failure in 2014 when we rocked up to the last game of the season thinking we had already won it. Complacent mindset leads to then, winning the next season. So I think it's about developing a humility and, knowing that failure is always around the corner as well.
Can I add there to, I love what Annie said there in terms of it's a mindset, and then giving you the example of rocking up and thinking you'd already won it. And I think that that's very much a narrative around performance. And what we're very socialized into all sports, but especially football, is it's all about performance. It's all about performance. And we're very tough on performance. We're very tolerant on mindset. We're tough on performance, tolerant on mindset. And in many respects, I challenge players and teams to reverse that. Let's start creating mental frameworks as individuals and as a team. Let's know what the mindset we want to have, and let's be tough on mindset. We can be, I know it sounds strange to be tolerant on performance, but the reality is we can't control performance. We're going to make mistakes. There's going to be times when, we find ourselves out of position, et cetera, when it's not quite there. But we can be much more accountable for our mindsets. It's much more within our control. And I think again, this word endemic in football is very much, let's be let's be tough on performance and tolerant on mindset. I want to create an environment where we're tolerant on performance, but we're brutally tough on mindset. When we arrive for that game that naturally we might be a bit complacent on, no, we're in our high performance mindsets. That's what we do here. That's our identity.
I could listen to you guys all day. We've actually got some questions from our audience, so we'll get started with them. So, open to the floor. What have you seen from performances of players with no fans in the stadium? Some seem to have thrived without the pressure, while others miss the adrenaline.
Lara, do you want to go first?
No, you can go. I don't know if I understand well the question. I don't know if I understand well the question.
Yeah, I think the score lines have actually maybe indicated a little bit that we've had some really mad score lines this season. One being last night, Southampton losing 9-0 again. I think there is something to be said for a sort of a weight off the back of players that is naturally going to be there when you're playing in front of 50,000 people every week. That has to have had an impact on fear of consequence or fear of mistake, and as a result, caused more goals. Yeah, I don't know whether the link is kind of an obvious loose one, but I feel like the results have kind of indicated that players are playing with a bit more carefreeness because they've not got fans barking at them.
I mean, when you were a player, you've achieved so much anyway, but were you ever affected by the fans shouting stuff or cheering for you? Did the atmosphere change how you felt your game was going?
For me, yes. Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, go, Laura. Yeah.
I mean, for us, it was like, when we say in the team, there's like 12 players because of the fan. And PSG, I remember when we played in Parc des Princes, we had the Ultras from Paris, and it was like a huge support. And it's making a difference. The fact that the fans are like screaming the names of the team, supporting you, of course, it's a huge plus. And today I can understand that some teams don't feel the same passion when they play. I mean, they play, but I can understand that sometimes the fans help you to pick up your level. Like you feel like you have another energy, but when you don't have these fans, it's different. It's definitely different. And I'm sure it's not easy for the players sometimes, especially when it's really hard. When you are losing, you don't have your fan, it must be really complicated.
I mean, Dan, do you think some players are actually enjoying the lack of fans? They're no longer worried about making mistakes or being ridiculed?
I know that some players are loving not having fans in the stadium. From the conversations I've been having, a crass estimation would be, 60-40 or 70-30 in favor of enjoying it, which is intriguing in and of itself. Definitely any spot on. Players feeling like they can play with greater freedom, less burden on making mistakes, which is interesting as a sports psychologist, because I would always want players to be able to orient towards themselves rather than the crowd. But that's not the way that naturally human beings function. If you've got 50,000 or 20,000 or 5,000 people around you screaming and shouting, then if they're going for you, you're going to release testosterone. You're going to release those performance hormones that help you, dopamine, adrenaline, those things. If they're going to go against you, you're going to release a hormone called cortisol, which is your stress hormone. So science actually tells us something about this. There are clearly players who get activated. We would use the term activation in sports psychology. You get activated by the atmosphere of the day, by having the crowd around them. And some are absolutely missing that. But I think they're less affected by it. It hasn't impacted them as much. The players who are enjoying it just are freer. And I do wonder if that's why there has been more goals. I think it's an intriguing scenario and some very odd results as well.
I think it would be interesting to know. It would be interesting to know which age which type of player are telling you that they are happy to not have the crowd. Maybe the young players and maybe the players who play away, the away teams and the young players. But
that was actually my next question.
Players may be missing the crowd.
You know what? I would say I know where you're going with that, and I would say you're going in the right direction. I'm not going to say there aren't older players who, I mean, over the last 15 years, the conversation I've had, you know, everybody on this panel has played the game. I haven't, but the conversations I've had is a lot to do with the impacts of the crowd and the expectations, and there are older players who have said, "Oh, actually, I'm quite enjoying this. This is quite cool. I quite like this," but you are right. I think, you know, players who haven't necessarily learned how to deal, you know, found their way to do it, deal with the crowd, are finding it a little bit more liberating, perhaps.
Dominic, you played as well. Do you think you would have struggled without the crowd, or do you think it's an opportunity for some possibly younger players to actually thrive without that pressure?
I think it depends on the player. I think some young players will go in, and if you think back to when games first came back, I think it was the Bundesliga and in Portugal where the games first returned after the initial lockdown. And watching the games on the TV was kind of surreal, right? There was no atmosphere. The game almost felt like a friendly, and you were getting these crazy scores that everybody's mentioned. So I think for some players that can be liberating, and for young players, you know, that just makes the transition into the first team that much easier, perhaps. And some players will thrive on you know, being escorted to the stadium with a police escort and signing autographs when they get off the bus and hearing their name chanted, or being booed as well, right? Some players get activated by that, as Dan rightly mentioned. One thing I want to touch on, just from a coaching perspective, is going into games after lockdown. I think because you missed all of that activation that Dan mentions, right? You missed the police escorts and the big fans and the noise in the stadium. Because that stuff is missing, sometimes it's difficult for players to appreciate that the game is actually important and that it's not a friendly that they're playing. So I think the job of the coach, I heard someone saying this the other day, talking about when they were returning to play competitive games, was really to make sure that players understood the importance of every game. And it was perhaps only after the games that you realize, oh, we lost 3 points today, or, you know, we jumped a position or two today because we won. So I think from a coaching standpoint, it was all about making sure that players realize, hey, this is a real game and it's important.
So we've got another question from the audience. This is a pretty good one. Who would you all hold as the gold standard player in mentality you've either worked or played with? So balancing all the different facets of competition. So a desire to win, aggression and self-control. I'm guessing that drops off a few Premier League players. So yeah, a player you've played against or played with.
So worked with or played against or played with?
Worked with or played with.
Well, I mean, I guess Cristiano Ronaldo, I kind of worked with him because, you know, we were at the same club at Juventus, and he actually, I turned up on my first day at Juventus at the same day as him, and we had to do, you know, all the fitness and medical tests, etc. And I realized pretty quickly, you know, that the medical test at Juventus was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I thought, you know, talk about winning mentality. I thought, I don't know if I can do this. And I think, you know, Ronaldo very much is the example of somebody who has the raw talent, of course, but his mentality is relentless. I think anyone who's played with him or anyone who's been in an environment that he's been in, you know, I think he changed the culture even at Juventus in the short space of time he's been there, in terms of the sports science and the training. So he's the obvious one. I think in terms of players I've played against, I would probably say all of the American girls, pretty much the entire US women's national team over the years. Actually, it's not, I don't think it's even just a specific team. I think it's a culture that they've been able to develop, and they're just uncompromising about winning. And And, you know, and I think there's something to be said for the fact that they're women being uncompromising about winning, because I think there is a distinction there. There was a conversation at the World Cup last year when they won 13-0 against Thailand and were still celebrating, and everyone was like, oh, you know, it's terrible that they're still celebrating at 13-0. But if you want to see what winning mentality looks like, I think that's what it looks like. So definitely I'd say that the
Oh, what? Have we lost any there? Are you back with us? Laura, if you...
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you again now.
Great.
Laura, if you'd like to say the most competitive player you've worked with or played against.
I will just give the example of one of my teammates. She was not a famous player. She died of cancer, of breast cancer, but she was such an example. She was humble. She had this winning mentality, and she was always supportive. She knew we were not as competitive as her, but she was understanding, and she was teaching us what it was like to be a winner, to be always giving 100%. And she was really supportive. And even through the cancer and the fact it was complicated for her, it was not showing that it was really hard, but she was always fighting, always showing the 100%. And she's not with us anymore, but I still remember this mentality of, okay, let's do the best. Whenever the level that we are tired, even if when she was tired, she was still, okay, let's do this. And yeah, and she was even older than us, but she was still running even faster, even doing even more effort than the young players. So yes, I will always remember my teammate and the person that she was, because she was giving 100% on and off the field and really humble. Yeah, and her name was Ingrid.
Love that story. Dominic?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a goalkeeper that I worked with, and he actually just made his first team debut for the US men's national team at the weekend. His name is Matt Turner. So Matt came to us, and I want to talk about how his mentality really changed in the time that we had him. So I had him at under 23 level, and Matt had been playing at a college in the US, and he'd been featured on a pretty infamous show. It was the top 10 worst sporting moments. And he'd been lobbed from the halfway line in a game, and the ball had come back off the bar, hit him on the back, and then gone in. And this clip was #1 on the top 10 worst sporting moments for about a year. So we had this kid come down. We didn't actually know about the clip. And you could just tell there was something bothering this kid. And you could see that he was really low on confidence. But when we started to work with him, you started to recognize that this kid had a lot of tools. And once we kind of spoke to him about using those tools and giving him a little bit of confidence, he turned his game around and became a real animal in terms of his mentality, and never stopped training, always working at his game, and become internally focused, right? We explained to him that as a goalkeeper, people are always going to pick out holes in your game, and they're always going to say you could have saved this or you could have done that. Where with Matt, we flipped it around and said, just focus on being the best you can be. Make sure your kicking's the best it can be. Make sure coming for crosses is the best it can be. And, I'm not saying that's the only reason he's on the national team now, but I'm sure that helped to get him started on the right track.
It definitely would have taken a lot of strength to rebuild your career after that. Dan, is there anyone you'd like to mention?
Yeah, I won't mention any clients just because of confidentiality, as you can, I'm sure you can expect. But there's a couple of things I want to mention here, actually, and to back up what Eni said. I mean, I've been blessed to work with quite a few of the members of the US national team over the last X amount of years, and I absolutely agree with Eni. I mean, they are super competitive. And an example could be, I mean, I interviewed Carly Lloyd for my podcast, The Sports Psych Show, recently, and it was off the back of her purchasing my books, Soccer Tough 2, and she purchased it. I don't know how old she is, but towards the back end of her career. So she's continuing to strive to get better, which I think is really impressive. And I also agree with Eni. If I may say this, I find women footballers far more open to the things that are going to help them to win more so than men. And for me, that's personally backed up by, I mean, Annie will know this. I think you know this, Natasha. I tweet relentlessly, and I have far more of the women's English women's national team, Scottish, Welsh, etc., following me on Twitter and interested and engaged in my tweets than the men's national team. So I'm just saying that. The final thing to say is, I'm going to say this person from my own sport, my own original sport of golf, and I understand some of the problems and challenges and controversial challenges off the golf course, but Tiger Woods just on the golf course, just phenomenal. And the reason why I'm picking him is because you can see that he has a framework to the mental side of the game. Even though he has so much skill in his hands, he understands that ultimately it's how he thinks his way around a golf course that counts. And you can see him managing himself as he does it. You can see him coach himself through the round. And I think you're not going to see that so much in football. I understand that, but I just think that that's something that all young players in any sport should be looking at. Him, Roger Federer, those type of people. So that would be my addition.
We don't have much time left, so I'm going to ask everyone to offer a piece of advice, because you've all got very high up in your careers. You know, you've been through challenges, but you've achieved a lot. So if you could just offer a short piece of advice to anyone who may need to hear it or may be listening at the moment.
I would say a quote that's always stuck with me is never let success get to your head or failure to your heart. And I think that's really interesting in terms of mindset towards winning. It's that level of humility and balance that you need, but whilst also knowing that you've got enough in you and the talent and the gift and the drive to achieve anything you want. So for me, that really helped me. You know, I used to get really down about failure and sometimes, you know, too high in success. So that's what I would definitely say, a good nugget to remember.
Dominic?
I would say stay hungry and stay open. Okay, so always be hungry to get better, but then always be open to different ways to get better. That would be my advice. And then from a coaching standpoint, that definitely applies, but then also just making sure your environment is fun and that players learn, because I think you get the best out of people that way.
Laura?
I would say always enjoy what you do. Always enjoy what you do. And if sometimes there's any critique, take it as a gift to improve. That's all.
And last but not least, Dan.
I love all of those. My little one would be a bit of a broken record. Have a mental framework. If you're a worker in the workplace, have a framework for your pitching, for your sales pitch, for your sales calls, for your difficult conversations. If you're a footballer, have a framework to the mental side of the game. And if you're a coach, help players have a framework to the mental side of the game and create feedback loops around that framework, because all of our feedback loops are around performance, as in 9 out of 10 for performance. Let's look at that. Let's explore that. Nobody ever does it around the mental side of the game. Always have a framework to the mental side of the game and always have feedback loops around those frameworks.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. I'd love to say thank you to the amazing panel. Thank you to the audience for the questions, and back to Ben in the studio.